Welcome to Bible Mind. We're continuing our series called Eternity, and today we're going to jump over to the book of Daniel. And Daniel's my first name, but I did not write the book. And so, any of you that thought that, I just want to put that to rest, that I didn't do that. But the book of Daniel, let's look at it in historical perspective. Almost every book of the Bible has at least some reference that is a future prophecy. And a lot of the prophecies in the Bible have come to pass. For example, those that have to do with the birth, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, prophesied in the Old Testament, came to pass. And other prophecies have come to pass. There are some that we know pertain to end times, and that's a lot of the scriptures that we're talking about in this series. And Daniel and Revelation stand out as the primary end-time prophetic books of the Bible. In Daniel chapter 8, and over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking out of Daniel 7, 8, and 9. But in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel's trying to get some meaning from these visions that he has seen, and the angel Gabriel comes to him and says, "I'm here to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath. What you have seen pertains to the very end of time." And there's also a scripture toward the end of that said after Daniel saw these things, he just fell on his bed and he was just sick. He couldn't move. Just the things that he saw were so weighty that it affected him physically from seeing these things at the very end of time. There is a debate among scholars, if you will, whether Daniel when Daniel was written and who it was written by. And it has a lot of relevance to the fact that is Daniel prophecy or is Daniel history. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah in 605 BC, and a young man named Daniel was taken among the Judean captives, taken to Babylon, and he was around 17 years old when he was taken. He was faithful to God, and God blessed him, and Daniel received positions really among several kings of Babylon. He received positions of great prestige and power because he was faithful to God, and God blessed him, and God did great things through him. And so these accounts are written in the book of Daniel, along with many other detailed visions that God gave him. The book of Daniel was likely written between 540 and 530 BC. All right, and that would put Daniel probably somewhere in the age range of 65-ish when he wrote those books. But there are some scholars who argue that Daniel was written somewhere in like 170 BC during the Maccabean era, and that the stories have been passed down, and so they wrote those, and that they put in a lot of other details and things, and we'll talk about why they feel that way. But they claim that this book was written for the purpose of encouraging Jews who were revolting against the tyranny of Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, who was a savage Greek tyrant intent on suppressing Israel. And so if it's true that it was written during that time period, then that makes a lot of the prophecies that Daniel saw as being historic, not prophetic. Okay? And so we'll look at some of those and you'll see what we mean. So there are some good arguments, though, for the book of Daniel being written by Daniel and for Daniel authorship of the book. First of all, the book claims to be written by Daniel. That would be the first thing that I would bring up. About 6 places in the book of Daniel, he says, "I, Daniel," or "me, Daniel," depending on the where it appears in the sentence, of course, because "me" would be the object of a preposition area, right? So, see, you go. Who are my English teachers in here? No? Okay. Anyway, you didn't know you were going to get an English lesson, did you? But Daniel claims to be the one writing the book, and so unless somebody just put that in there as a lie or whatever. The second reason would be that in Matthew 24:15, Jesus calls Daniel a prophet. He didn't say that it was written later and was historical, but he calls Daniel a prophet in the things that he said prophecy. The third thing is Ezekiel, who was actually a contemporary of Daniel. They lived in the same time. Ezekiel refers to Daniel 3 different times in the book of Ezekiel. And he puts him in a position between Noah and Job. One place is Ezekiel 14:13 through 14. It says, "Son of man, when a land sins against me by acting faithlessly, even if these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver but their own lives by righteousness, declares the Lord our God." And so when we look at this and we read it in the English translation, we see Daniel and we thought, okay, well, he's talking about the Daniel of the Bible, right? Just because that's what we associate it with. But there are many scholars that believe that this Daniel is actually there was a historic figure that was really kind of like a mythological hero named Daniel. When you look at Daniel or Daniel, Daniel, that's really, you have to think the ancient text did not use vowels. Okay, so the actual Hebrew text spells Daniel DNL. Okay, and I should have put the actual Hebrew up here for you. But so when you read that, some people will inject like different pronunciations or whatever. And so this Daniel figure of mythology was claimed to be a righteous person, but he was really a pagan. So would Ezekiel have claimed that this pagan mythological Daniel, would he have sandwiched him in between Noah and Job, right? And there's a lot of arguments about that. Actually, if you want to go down that rabbit trail, you guys may be the only ones in the room that might. But you can look that up, look at who's the Daniel of Ezekiel, and you can find a lot of articles on that. But the Daniel that they're claiming, I don't believe would be the Daniel that Ezekiel would be talking about. If Daniel, let's just put it this way. So Daniel is a contemporary of Ezekiel. They're both captives. They're in different areas, and they didn't have Facebook then, right? And they didn't have a lot of community. So Daniel and Ezekiel may not have even really known each other. But if you had someone that was anointed by God and that was doing great things and had become partial ruler of the land because he had interpreted dreams of the king, he had been thrown in a lion's den, and say, word's going to get around, right? And so it's very likely that Ezekiel did know Daniel as a prophet, as he was a prophet as well. Even though Daniel isn't necessarily, even biblically claimed, Daniel is not considered a prophet of God. You understand that, right? We consider him a prophet because he uttered what? Prophecy. So to us, that makes him a prophet. But in Daniel's life, Daniel was not a prophet. Daniel was a diplomat. Daniel had a place of position in the king. But God used him and prophesied through him. And so therefore, in retrospect, we look at Daniel as a prophet. But I do believe that the Daniel of Ezekiel is the Daniel of the Bible. And so if Ezekiel then is talking about Daniel in his writing, then Daniel had to be a real character of notoriety in that time, and the book of Daniel would have been written during that time. The fourth reason for a Daniel authorship, Josephus, if you remember him, Flavius Josephus in the 1st century, he was a historian, a Jewish historian that really kind of was a turncoat, kind of turned to favor the Romans during that time. But he wrote about a lot of things. And Joseph believed that the book of Daniel was shown to Alexander the Great. When Alexander conquered Jerusalem and came into Jerusalem, some people found the book of Daniel and say, hey, right, and you'll see where that comes in a minute. But they said, hey, we found this writing, and right here it's showing that you're coming in. And so Josephus believed that the book of Daniel was written prior, at least way prior to Alexander the Great coming into This is the quote from Josephus. It says, "He," meaning Alexander, "came into the city, and when he went up to the temple, he offered sacrifice to God according to the high priest's direction, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priest. And when the book of Daniel was shown to him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the temple of the Persians, he supposed that himself was that person indeed." So Alexander the Great, read that prophecy and said, "Oh, that must be me." The fifth reason is there's other books that were written during the Maccabean time, like First Maccabees and First Enoch, that was written during that time that quotes from the book of Daniel. And it's very unlikely that they would have quoted from a contemporary work. They would have quoted from a prophetic work of older time. And the sixth reason is the writing style and some of the words used in Daniel are more fitting for the 6th century BC than the 2nd century BC. So even though there's debate and there's argument, we're going to side with Daniel was written by Daniel in the 6th century BC while he was in captivity in Babylon. Okay? The biggest argument against a Daniel authorship, though, the reason that even people had an interest in putting that in the period they did, is because of the accuracy of his prophecies. They were so precise, they were so accurate that people said this couldn't be prophecy, it has to be history.
Don't they do the same thing around there?
Yep, because he called Cyrus by name, didn't he? And so people look at that, look back on that and say, oh, well, they couldn't have known. But who are these prophets getting their information from? God. And does God know? God knows. And the Bible says that God is a revealer of secrets, right? So these scholarly assumptions would seem to minimize God's influence, who knows the future accurately and is the revealer of his own mystery. So why is this important? Why is it important to know, to understand that Daniel is prophecy and not history? Because if Daniel's prophecy if they were accurate to the times that was just right after him, then they will also be accurate of his prophecies for end time. And that's why it's important. If we can trust his prophecies here, then we can say, all right, we see what happened here. We know that Daniel was a man that heard from God, and so that his prophecies will come about later. Something that you didn't know, everybody has a past, right? And one thing that you didn't know about Terry, because she's so quiet, is that she used to be a rapper. This is not Terry, by the way. Anybody ever heard this song?
Here's our story. King Nebuchadnezzar had a people out of all that man. He had a face like me with a mic in his hand.
Break dancers. Blake, you want to break dance for us?
We'll pick you up.
So back, back in my youth pastor days, this had come out, and this is a group called PID, which stands for Preachers in Disguise, and they were in the early 90s a Christian rap group, and so this album came with 6 songs, and the same 6 songs was given again after it with no vocals as a soundtrack. So me and Terry used the soundtrack and rapped this song in youth one night. And I was just teasing her and said we ought to do this in Sunday school, and she didn't say that she wouldn't. But I opted not to put y'all through that pain. This song is all about King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and he had a dream, and so this dream disturbed him so much that he called for all the wise men in his realm, all his magicians, all his soothsayers, and he said, okay, I had this disturbing dream, and I don't want anybody playing games with me. So I'm not going to even tell you the dream. You're going to tell me my dream, and then you're going to tell me its interpretation, and if you don't, I'm going to kill all of you. And they said, well, King, no one has ever asked anything like that of anybody ever. I mean, that's impossible. They said, King, you tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means. And they're like, no, that's not the way it's going to work. Because if I tell you, you'll just tell me anything just to get out of dying. So no, you're going to tell me the dream and you're going to tell me what it means or you're all going to die. Well, for some reason, Daniel wasn't invited to this party, but he was in the king's court of wise men. And so word got to Daniel that what this king had said. And so he said, take me to the king. And so Daniel prayed, and his three friends I guess three godly roommates, if it were, they prayed. And so Daniel went to the king, and he said, hey, God is a revealer of all things. And so Daniel was able to tell the king his dream and tell him the interpretation and got everybody off the hook. Right? So good for Daniel. Saved a lot of lives that day. But this dream that the king had, Here's what Daniel said in Daniel 2:31 through 35. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was fine gold. Its chest and its arms, its middle and thighs were of bronze. Its legs of iron. Its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And so Daniel interprets this dream, and when we look back on this, we see 4 kingdoms that arose that became the interpretation of this dream. So the golden head of the statue refers to Nebuchadnezzar. This was his kingdom. He was the golden head. Then the chest and the arms of silver represent the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and the thighs of bronze point to the Greek Empire. Then the iron legs stand for the Roman Empire. And the mix of iron and clay signify a mixture of people not united. And we recognize the rock that broke the whole statue in pieces as what? As a type of Christ. And so Christ comes and he becomes the rock that breaks down these other kingdoms and fills the whole earth. So Daniel had a parallel dream to this later. Nebuchadnezzar's gone, he's off the scene, but he has this dream that has roughly, but in more detail, talking about the same nations. So his dream was about a 2-horned ram. If you don't know, the reason I pointed is he has 2-horned rams. We should have brought one for show and tell, right? That would have been cool. So there was a ram with 2 long horns, and he was standing beside the river, and one of the horns was longer than the other. And the long horn was actually the long horn. This was the newer horn. The shorter horn was the older horn. And the ram just butted everybody out of the way and did whatever he pleased. And then his dream took him to a shaggy male goat. And it came from the west, crossing the ground so fast that his feet didn't even touch the ground. Anybody had dreams like this? Unenhanced dreams? But the goat had 1 long horn between his eyes, and he struck the ram, breaking off the ram's horns, and then he trampled the ram. The goat became powerful, but at the height of his power, his long horn broke off, and in its place 10 horns grew out, pointing in the 4 directions of the earth. And the dream goes on, but this is the dream that he had, and it was very disturbing to him, actually. And so this is why Gabriel was sent to Daniel. It's like, okay, this is not, last night's burrito. Let me tell you what this means. And he got the interpretation of that. So the two-horned ram was the kings of Media and Persia. The ram was like a national symbol of the Medo-Persian Empire. It was actually stamped on their money, their coins. So there's coins that are there that actually have ram stamped on them from that empire. The Media actually was established first, and then the smaller Persian Empire, when they joined together, the Persian Empire actually rose and kind of became more significant than Media. And so this is represented in the dream that now keep in mind, Daniel's seeing these things before the Medo-Persian Empire came to power. And so this is very accurately depicting what went on. The Medo-Persian Empire exerted its power to the north, to the south, and to the west. It took territory, but it made no conquest to the east. The shaggy goat, anybody have any idea who the shaggy goat was? What's that? Greece, right. The shaggy goat was Greece. This would have been the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. The goat was commonly represented by the Greek Empire. As a matter of fact, 200 years before Daniel's time, the Greeks, or these people, were considered the goat's people. And so that was a representative of them. The greatness of Alexander's empire was not only its vast dominion, but also in its cultural power. We know that Alexander the Great was determined to make everybody in his empire Greek, right? He made the language common, which helped the advancement of the gospel, because this area had a common language, Koine Greek, which is what the New Testament is written in, and is the language that was spoken in the first century. And so God guided history, and he used Alexander's passion to spread Greek culture and to prepare the way for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because of Alexander's influence, it allowed the gospel to be spread once Jesus came. These nations existed during Daniel's time, but they had not risen to world power yet. Daniel wrote this about 8 years before before Persia started its conquest. And when Alexander the Great died unexpectedly at age 33, he divided the kingdom because he had no heirs, he had no sons, and so the kingdom was divided between his 4 generals. Okay, so that's the 4 horns. And so this prophecy is so exact that it causes doubting critics to call the visions historical rather than prophetic utterances. When Daniel presented these things, they would have been cryptic and hard to understand, right? I mean, even a little bit to him. And when there were some things that when Gabriel was explaining it to Daniel, he would just say, okay, just close that one off. You're not going to understand that one, and because they're very mysterious, very cryptic, even to these days. People, scholars, they're divided on what these things mean. But the ones that have taken place, it's easy to see exactly what happened in these nations and how they're represented in this bizarre imagery, right? In the same way, the things that we don't yet understand for the future will be clear once those things come to pass, right? Because when we look at things that we don't understand, it's hard to make sense out of it. But we know that when they come to pass, then all things will be revealed. So let's look in Daniel chapter 7, starting with verse 2. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up in the great sea. And 4 great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. Then, as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground, and made to stand on its 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. The winged lion is also it's a common. If you see some of the artifacts archaeology from the Babylonian period? How many of you have like maybe watched some YouTube stuff on that time and you see the winged lion from the Babylonian time? Okay, so some of you have. And so that we see that imagery in Babylon, so we know that the winged lion would be talking about Babylon. And so the first beast of the kingdom was Babylon. The wings being plucked off are believed to be the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember that story, we don't have time to go into all that, but Nebuchadnezzar had become so great that it went to his head, and God sent him into a time of very great humbling. And so this is seen as the wings of the lion being plucked off. And so we have a picture of a beast who was more beastly in the beginning, but more human at the end. Then Daniel 7:5, it says, "And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, 'Arise, devour much flesh.'" So the bear depends on brute force, right? The bear is seen to be the Medo-Persian Empire. And again, I was talking about a while ago where the Media, the Medes, they were a little, they had come up first, but then the Persian Empire was raised up ahead of them, right? So this is the bear with much strength that's raised up on one side. So we have 2 sides, but we have one side raised up more than the other. That would be the Persians. The brute force of the bear is borne out by the Persian Empire. When they would come and when they were attacked, they had between their foot soldiers and navy had 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers, and they would just overwhelm everybody that they came in contact with. I did that raised up on one side, didn't I? So you can go ahead and put that. Do another click. Okay, that was the raised up on one side. And then when it's talking about the 3 ribs in its mouth, that was the 3 ribs symbolize the 3 previous world empires, the Egyptian, the Assyrian, and the Babylonian world empires that the Medes and the Persians had taken over, and that was the 3 ribs in its mouth. Then verse 6 says, "After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with the 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it." So who do you think the leopard is? Okay, what's that?
Greek Empire.
Okay, the Greek Empire. Again, and so this is kind of like the goat that came across so fast that it didn't even touch the ground, right? So the leopard here we see has 4 wings, also talking about swiftness. In 8 years, Alexander the Great had conquered from Italy to India in 8 years. That's the swiftness of his conquer that went by. And so that's looking at it as a very swift, a very fast conqueror that came across. Its 4 heads represent the division of Alexander's empire, again, like we talked about a while ago, after his sudden death in 323 BC, and his reign was given out to his 4 generals. In Daniel 7:7 it says, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, and it devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns." So who do you think this 4th beast represented?
That would be the Roman Empire.
That would be the Roman Empire, exactly.
They had their 10 provinces.
Yeah. And so this beast was a little different from the first 3, and it seems uglier and more powerful and a little more destructive. And so in verse 23, we're going to jump on down there because that's where Gabriel's explaining some things to Daniel. It says, "As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces." The Roman Empire became huge and dominating everything in its path from 27 BC to like 426 BC. 450 years, the Roman Empire dominated that really the whole known world to them anyway. So Rome was not conquered by a 5th power. Rome was never conquered. It divided, first into east and west, and then it divided into 10 other kingdoms, and it just got weak enough. It kind of imploded from within, right? Until the Visigoths and the barbarians from the north were able to just come in and just run them over. And we're glad too, because they brought pants. That's a different story. Did y'all know that? Did y'all know that everybody wore dresses until the Visigoths came down from the north and they brought pants, and everybody's like, hey, we like these pants. Notice almost everybody in here is wearing pants today, so thank you, Visigoths.
Abby's on the program.
Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by its roots, and behold, in the horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and mouth speaking great things. So this fourth beast, it had 10 horns, okay, and that's you have to shift with Daniel here, because when some prophetic books, and you can see this in most of the prophecies in the Bible, even the prophecies about Christ, when you're reading some of the prophetic things that Daniel said about Christ, that even some of the ones, he was bruised in Isaiah for our transgressions, we see implications of near prophetic vision that has some prophecy for near time and then for future time. Okay, so some even prophecies about Christ had dual fulfillment. And so some of the prophecies that Daniel had also has a near implication, fulfillment of prophecy, and a far implication of prophecy. And so we see in this vision that Daniel's starting to talk about some things that are for the end time. And Gabriel told him that these are for the very end of time. So we see this little horn that comes up, and this little horn starts speaking great things and has a big mouth, if you will. I saw a picture of this. It was this picture of the horns, and this one horn coming up, and it had a face put on it with just just this big mouth. But anyway, this little horn comes up and it starts speaking great things. Does anybody know in prophecy who this little horn is believed to be? What's that? It is not John the Baptist. The Antichrist. And so this little horn comes on the scene and starts boasting great things. That's okay. You didn't have enough context for that. So.
Talking about the dual purple.
Oh, gotcha. Hey, might be worth looking into. I've never studied it out in that vein. But so we see that in these end times, there's a man who will arise that will come on the scene as a ruler, because all these horns were rulers, okay? And so this one ruler comes up, and it just shatters some other horns and raises itself against the other horns and speaks great things. This fourth beast with the 10 horns is often used to represent both the origin of the Roman Empire and the end time revived Roman Empire, which can get a little complicated. That's why throughout time and prophecy, a lot of people thought that the Pope was going to be the Antichrist. And we're going to spend a whole week later on who the Antichrist might be. That'll be fun, won't it? But I'll go ahead and spoiler alert. The Pope's not going to be the Antichrist, so sorry to disappoint if you thought he was. So because of this, because of the in prophecy. A lot of it arises from the Roman Empire. There's a belief that the Roman Empire is going to reunite. We'll talk about a little bit what that might really look like later. But from this comes this horn that speaks great things. And during the tribulation, there's going to be a one world government that's going to come together. And it's believed that during this time, the earth is going to be divided into 10, these 10 horns. The earth is going to be divided into 10 regions with 10 rulers over these regions. And then the Antichrist is going to come up as being above all those and kind of just break through the barrier and be the established world leader. Daniel was most curious about this fourth terrifying beast. in verse 19, it says, Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying. Anybody ever had just a terrifying dream? You just woke up, and so just put yourself in Daniel's place. He's seeing these beasts come out of the sea, and I mean, they're very frightening to him. Which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up after and before, which 3 of them fell off. 3 of them fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. And we've talked about who we believe that to be previously. Until the Ancient of Days comes. Who's the Ancient of Days? Okay. Christ, right? We believe Christ, God the Son. He comes, and judgment was given, and the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, verse 23, As for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms. And it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it into pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High. So that would make him not John the Baptist, right? Now you have a little more context. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time, which we've talked about that previously. And the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom of the dominion of the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. That's a lot to take in, right? Put yourself in Daniel's place. And first you have this just really trippy dream. And then you get this for the interpretation of it. And you don't even have Daniel where he's sitting right now. He doesn't even have the hindsight to be able to look and see how the Medo-Persian Empire and the Roman Empire and the Babylonians. He's in the time of the Babylonians, and he doesn't see all the other except for in the prophetic. And so he's just like, blown away. And that's what, it just makes him sick in his body because of all this. It's heavy. It's a heavy realization that has come upon Daniel for this end time. The 11th horn, identified as the little one, we talked about being the Antichrist, who will rule with violence and oppression during the tribulation. But the Father gives authority and glory to the sovereign power of Christ, who defeats the Antichrist and sets up an everlasting kingdom. And so there's a lot packed into what Daniel saw that covers a long period of time, right? And so then when John the Revelator, when John the Apostle gets the revelation of Christ and the end times that we call Revelation, that starts filling in some of those gaps. So as I said earlier, Daniel's vision had dual implications. So they had some near time implication, they had some future end time implication, but also not just earthly things. Daniel sees things that happen in the heavens. He sees things that happen in the spiritual. And if we can take something out of this today, what I want you to take is there's more than what we see on this earth that's going on. And when we look in our spiritual eyes, we know that just like it says in Ephesians 12, it says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against rulers and against authorities and against cosmic powers or principalities and powers." So we know there's things that go on outside of just our flesh and bone and blood and the things that make us human, right? There's things that go on even around us in a spiritual realm, and there's war that goes on, and there's things that go on that we don't know about in the natural, but you can have eyes to see in the spiritual. And so Daniel's seeing not only things that are happening around him in the natural and things that are going to happen in the natural in the future, but he's also seeing spiritual warfare. He's also seeing spiritual things happen around him. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 9 and 10, it says, "As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened." And so, as we look in Daniel's dream, we see that he's seeing a little bit of what's happening on earth. And then, just like we talked about the last couple of weeks, he's seeing a little bit about what's happening in heaven. And so Daniel's got a wide view of this thing, right? You know, it's like, have you ever been to like a concert and you sat at the back? Like in the arena or whatever? And you can see a little bit of what's happening on stage, but you can see the sound booth, you can see what they're doing down there, you can see all the people, what all the people's doing, right? So Daniel has this wide view, and he's seeing things that are happening on earth. He's seeing things that are happening in the spiritual and future and around the throne room of heaven. And so he sees a succession of kingdoms, and then the end time kingdom, when the world ruler comes to power, his vision shifts to the courtroom scene in heaven that we talked about for a couple of weeks, and where God is on the throne, and countless thousands of people are standing before the throne awaiting their judgment. We believe this to be what? Starts with a B, if you want to call it by its Greek name. The Bema seat. Right? See, I best remember that because Petra had a song called Bema Seat, so I always remember. That was my first introduction to that word. And so we've already identified the Bema Seat judgment where Christ judges the church for its deeds. Then in Daniel chapter 7, verse 11 and 12, it says, "I looked then because of the sound of the great words of the horn that was speaking." So here's Daniel, you know, he sees what's going on in heaven. He sees this judgment that's taking place. And then he hears this great horn. So he turns his attention back down and sees what's happening on earth again. The horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And so we see a succession of things happening. So Daniel sees the church in heaven, those that are around the throne, and then after that time he sees that the beast was put to an end, and then after a time they were subdued but not destroyed for a time, and then at the end they were destroyed. So Daniel's seeing a lot of stuff going on and a lot of time frame there. In conclusion, next week we're going to talk a little bit more about Daniel 8 and 9. And I know we kind of started in 8 today, but we're going to talk a little bit more about 8, and then in chapter 9 talking about the 70th week.